Welcome to the Tree of Life podcast. My name is Joel Ledford, and I have the privilege of being here today with Vicki Morgan. Vicki, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So, Vicki, one of the things that we do in the show is we usually start by asking people about their backgrounds. And so I'm interested to know, how did you end up at UC Davis? How did you get interested in science? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I grew up in Miami, Florida. I was raised by a single mother, and then it was really important for her to take us out to the beaches and to parks, and so we spent a lot of time outside exploring the world. And I feel like a lot of my interest came from those excursions I used to take with her growing up. After I graduated high school, I did my undergrad at Cornell University, and then I took 2 gap years to work at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography down in San Diego. And then after that, I was feeling the urge to go back into science, and so I applied to grad school here at UC Davis, and I'm currently a 5th year in population biology.
Wow, that's amazing. So what was it like to be little Vicki? Like, were you on the beach and then you looked out and you were mesmerized? What triggered your interest in science?
I think I used to just watch a lot of Animal Planet, and so originally I wanted to be a veterinarian, but then the thought of cutting into animals just sort of freaked me out. But then I wanted to be some sort of wildlife biologist, and so I remember one of my essays for applying to Cornell was about me exploring some jungle in the forest, looking for some animals, and that was always just something that was really important to me, is just learning about animals.
So you grew up in Florida, and then you moved to upstate New York.
Yes.
How was winter?
Hard. So I had my first winter there, and it was amazing to see the snowfall, but then it just didn't stop. And so I remember my last year was snowing in May or something like that. So it was very intense winters, but they were also really beautiful and different from where I grew up.
Nice.
So it was really nice to get that change of scenery and experience seasons. I saw my first fall, so it's pretty
great.
exciting.
That's great. Today we want to talk about a few things, but one of the themes that I would at least start the conversation with is just the transition to life on land. And so given that this transition has happened in animals multiple times independently, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about, what do you think the advantages are to living life on land? What are the challenges that animals have to overcome when they transition to life on land? What you think.
Yeah, so I think it's a very difficult transition to make, just because there are a lot of physiological and biological systems that have to change to actually make the animal able to survive on terrestrial habitats. And it makes it so that's a really difficult transition to make. So all of the terrestrial life that we see on Earth currently, apart from the crabs, is arisen from about 6 to 7 ancestors that came up onto land and were just really successful, and they diversified there. And what's interesting about my research is that in the crabs alone, that transition has happened independently up to 11 times.
Wow.
So the crabs seem really good at doing it. Everything else seems really bad at doing it. And so my research is trying to understand why that's so. But some of the challenges is, how do you breathe air on air? So if you're normally used to breathing air in the water, getting oxygen from the water, how do you do that on land? A lot of reproductive systems have to change, osmoregulation, nitrogenous waste excretion, visual and olfactory systems. So there's a long list of challenges they have to adapt to.
What about reproduction? I mean, so whenever I think of the transition to life on land, I think, if you're ancestrally marine or in the water, probably you're doing some kind of external fertilization, you're, broadcasting gametes, and then when you get on water, you have kind of a new set of challenges. How do crabs solve this problem?
So there are 2 main ways that they solve it. So the crabs that have come up through fresh water have adapted to have more direct development. So instead of doing the broadcast spawning, they lay eggs, and then the juveniles hatch as baby crabs after they develop inside of the egg. And so that seems to be unique for the freshwater crabs. But then the marine crabs actually have these really amazing migrations where they go back to the ocean and they drop their eggs in the water to develop more fully. And so in a way, the ones that have come up through the intertidal zone are still very connected to the ocean, because every year they have to migrate back. And it's led to these really incredible migrations on Christmas Island, where you just have hundreds of thousands of crabs that leave the forest to go to the ocean and mate and then just come back. And so,
wow, that's amazing. So is there some kind of cue that they're using to all sort of push out at once?
It's kind of amazing. So it's tied to the rainy season. So whenever it starts to rain a lot, the crabs sort of notice, oh, it's time to go. And so they all just leave their burrows and they start making their migration. And it also seems to happen around December or January every year. So it's probably like the cue of the wet season in Australia, which is where it is.
Right.
And, yeah.
Wow. And so you go on the beach and you just see thousands and thousands of crabs.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then a month later, you come out and all the baby crabs are coming back from the ocean. And then they're just like these itty bitty little things. There are lots of like really amazing videos on YouTube of that, I guess, reverse migration of the baby crabs coming back on the land.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, one of the crabs that I think about when I think about your research that you've been doing are coconut crabs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're definitely standouts
Yeah.
among crabs. So I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about coconut crabs, what they are, who they're related to, and what their general biology is like.
Sure. So I think the coconut crab is the most conspicuous land crab just because it gets to be like a meter in length and 4 kilograms. So they get to be really big and massive. And just if you ever are in a place that has a coconut crab, they're just really hard to miss because they're big and they sort of walk really slowly. They're closely related to hermit crabs, so they're actually hermit crabs. And so when they're young, they actually grow inside of the shell, but then they get to a size where they can't find any snail shells that are big enough, and they just abandon the shell and they just keep getting bigger. So they're hermit crabs. Yeah.
They're hermit crabs. So I go and we in Biz2C labs, for example, we definitely use hermit crabs as examples. And when I think of a coconut crab, man, that's a big crab.
Yeah.
So its closest relatives are hermit crabs.
Yep. And so there are other terrestrial hermit crabs that still live inside of the shell, but the coconut crab is the only one that's left that shell microenvironment.
Wow. So what do they eat?
They love coconuts, so they're called coconut crabs because they can actually climb up into the coconut trees and pull the coconuts down and husk them. But they also eat lots of fruits. So the pandan fruit they're a fan of. So whenever that's blooming, all the coconut crabs are like walking across the island to get to that food source. And then they're also a little bit like trash pandas. So they go through people's trash and eat whatever smells good, pretty much.
So the people that live among coconut crabs, conceivably, they could wake up in the morning to go empty their trash, and there's a giant coconut crab there.
Yes, and so the trash cans on the island where on Christmas Island, which is where their biggest population is, actually have certain locks to prevent the crabs from actually opening up the trash cans.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So do people eat coconut crabs?
Yeah, unfortunately. And so it makes it so that they're actually endangered in most of their range because they have those huge meaty claws on the front. And so people like to eat those. But the problem with that is that when you have a really big crab, it tends to be really old. And so if it gets to the size where it's like 4 kilograms in weight and has like a meter long leg span, it is probably like 60 or 70 years old because they develop really slowly. And so if people are out there eating the biggest crabs they see, they're really impacting the population by taking the biggest, oldest crabs.
Wow, so what is their lifespan?
So it's about the same as ours, actually. They live to about 60 or 70.
70 years.
They get
Wow,
really, really
that's
old,
amazing.
really big. Yeah. But on Christmas Island, they're protected. And so you can actually get in a lot of trouble and get fined if you actually are found killing and eating the crabs there.
Okay. Wow. So one of the other things that, of course, comes up in your research is coloration. And so when you look at coconut crabs online, I have always noticed that they seem to have this polymorphism. But I wonder if you could tell us, what is color polymorphism? What does it mean? And what are the sort of questions around coconut crabs and their color polymorphism?
Yeah, for sure. So a color polymorphism is when you have the same species of an animal, but they come in like different color morphs. And so that applies to the coconut crabs because they have two very distinct morphs. One is like red and the other one is this very deep ultramarine blue color. And then there's been a lot of questions about why they come in these two different color morphs. But no one really knows what's causing that or what's the ecological function of that, if there's any function. And so then just what we've been trying to do is figure out what is leading to those differences in color. And so Tim Carroll and I have actually gone to lots of different islands to sample these crabs and a lot of their ecology to see if there are any correlates with red crabs and blue crabs. And so far we haven't found any major ones. So they're both male and female blue and red crabs and big and small blue and red crabs. On islands, they can be found together. And so there doesn't seem to be any sort of microhabitat differentiation there. There are some differences in like the islands. And so Japan only has blue crabs and Aldabra, which is off the coast of Africa, only has red crabs. But there are a lot of other islands where they occur together. And so it's really hard to figure out what the reason is or what the I guess, determinant for the different colors is across this range.
And so when I think of color polymorphism, the example I always think about are birds. And so sex is definitely not resulting in this difference in color between the two.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So, but there are islands with only blue, and there are islands with only red.
Yes.
Do you think that there's been some migration, or?
So since these crabs are the ones that actually have to go back to the ocean to drop their eggs in the water, there could be some geographical differences, and so maybe there's like a founder effect. So maybe the only crabs that got out to Japan's Okinawa Island, for example, were blue crabs or Aldabra. There are only red crabs there. But that's a theory that we're still trying to test to see if there are population structural differences between the populations of coconut crabs that sort of lead to this difference in color that we see.
But ancestrally, you think this polymorphism was present?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
And so the biggest population, we do have both blue and reds there, the one on Christmas Island.
Wow.
And so maybe they just started with this polymorphism, and then on the further reaches of their range, you start to see differences in how, like, the ratios of the different crabs.
Okay. And so I guess the next question I really have is that I know you work on, land crabs just in general, and among the things that is a focus of your research is convergent evolution. And so I wonder if you could just briefly define convergent evolution for us.
Yeah. So convergent evolution is when you have the independent evolution of traits that seem to be adaptive in a certain habitat. So for our land crabs, if once they move onto land, they don't breathe with their gills anymore. They've developed these structures called pseudolungs. And what we're seeing is in several lineages across the Brachyuran tree of life, the pseudolung feature has appeared independently. And so it seems to be really important for helping them breathe on air. And so then the questions that I'm trying to ask in my research is, are these pseudolung structures based on similar genetic mechanisms? So are they using a similar toolbox of genes to help them adapt to land?
Right. So just to rephrase that, so you have land crabs that have invaded land multiple times independently, different lineages of land crabs.
Yes.
And associated with that, coming back to where we started, among the challenges of adapting to life on land is respiratory. And so then you have similar structures that are derived independently in these pseudolungs, but the question is whether or not they have a common genetic mechanism. I guess I always think of things like eyes when I think of this, because I know that things like opsin genes are involved in a lot of eyes. Is this similar?
Yes, so it's probably they're using the same sorts of genes to derive this structure because it seems to be in the same place on most of the crabs that have moved up on the land. And then there are some differences between all the different types of pseudolungs that we see. But then what I'm trying to see is how deep does that convergence go? So if they have a pseudolung, are they using the same types of genes to construct it?
Great. Well, we really appreciate you coming on the show today, and it was great to hear about your research, and we definitely look forward to hearing about some of your future work and discoveries.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching our video. If you enjoyed the content but would like an audio-only version, please go to iTunes and look up Tree of Life UC Davis. If you want to see more videos on YouTube, please click the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the little bell icon if you want to receive notifications of new content.